Hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of Thrive After Divorce, where I bring you the experts to help you not just survive divorce, but thrive. And I'm going to start this one a little different because I am always excited and I'm always ready to learn, serve, share the message, hope it helps someone. But before we even start, I have to say today, getting ready for this, I already know I'm like, this needs to be shared, blasted to all the parents, because today we are talking about the grief that children go through in divorce. And we have Jean Mulloy here to help us in that process. Welcome, Jean.
Hi, thank you for having me.
You're welcome. I was so excited and just talking to you, I didn't even ask, did I pronounce your last name correctly?
You sure did.
Okay. I usually confirm that. But so we are going to talk about the grief that children may go through, and you're going to help us. And you are a clinical psychologist.
Yep.
You are. I'm like, actually, I'm emotional about this one today. You are the director of Kathy's Place, the Center for Grieving Children.
Yeah.
And you have an independent practice, Terra Family Counseling Services, which is in Tampa. You're out of Tampa. And your goal is to increase awareness regarding the needs of grieving children who experience a supportive, your goal is to increase awareness regarding the needs of grieving children and to increase the number of children who experience a supportive environment through the bereavement process.
Yeah.
That is an incredible goal.
That's the goal, because we know that when children's grief needs aren't met, they trip them up later on in life. And so if we can meet their needs when they're grieving, we can avoid a lot of heartache that people experience later on.
Yeah, and I was telling you before we started, I have never covered this topic, and I hadn't even thought of it because I think of co-parenting, and so many times with the divorce things, we want to put a spin on it and make the children feel secure and good, and you're going to have 2 homes and you're going to have 2 bikes, and it's going to be great. It's going to be good. And in some cases that doesn't happen, but I'm just saying overall we try to
support them, and we want to
make it pretty. We want to make it pretty.
Right. And we want to try to redirect them sometimes away from what hurts. And sometimes that is an appropriate role as a parent, right? To support them and help them feel grateful and help to support them in what they do have and what is still going to be true in their life. You know, it's not all bleak, but sometimes our role has to be to meet them where they're at and allow them to feel what they feel and to know that they're hurting.
Now, first, I just want to establish, we're saying children, but what age range do you really work with? Like, what falls in that bracket? So all minors or up to?
Yeah, really all ages. So one of the things that's tricky with children in grief, and whether it's a death or a divorce, it's still grief, and they revisit it because grief is an emotional process, but it's also a cognitive process. And so as children grow, their thinking skills change. So they're not just done at the time of the loss. If they're 5, 10, 15, wherever they are at the time of the loss, they have to revisit those processes of grieving again because their thinking skills will change. And so
then do they view it differently too?
Their ability to understand things more complexly, their ability to have empathy for people in more mature ways, just their understanding. As their thinking skills grow, their emotional complexity also grows. So they're not really done with a loss. No. Say an adult might take 2 years, right? For a child, they have to revisit it. So it's not like it's done.
No. Well, I'm thinking, we have the 5 stages of grief, those things, but they probably didn't get to go through those 5 stages So for example, like the anger stage, that might pop up years later when their brain can process something and go, I'm angry about that.
Yeah, exactly. Whether it's, building an honest composite of the loss and what happened, whether it's reliving some of the experiences, all these different processes and stages of grief, they don't do just once and done.
No.
So it can be surprising when a child that seems to have been going along just fine, all of a sudden isn't getting their homework turned in or isn't paying attention in class, because the mental energy of processing the grief is drawing their attention.
Yeah. As I have two daughters, they are 14 and 17. Took me a minute. And through being their mom, from little girls to teenage girls, I know I have said to my girlfriends have said it to me, certain things where it's a loss of a pet. Like my daughter was little and her goldfish died, and you just hold them crying, and then you go to your girlfriend, I didn't know what to say. I didn't even know what to do. Because you know that they're grieving, and you can't just say, we'll get a new goldfish. They're crying over this goldfish that's floating. You can't say, it'll come back tomorrow. So I was thinking
you can't make it better.
We can't make it better. And I don't know any parent that was like, well, here's what you do with grief. So like, this show needs to get out there and to give parents the tools and the education.
Right.
To help.
So the thing is, you can't make it better.
No.
Again, whether it's the loss of a pet or death or this, to them, it could be a catastrophic change that have two homes, right? Like you have to kind of work with more of the acceptance and the compassionate listening, where you don't try to change their reality, but you really let them express it.
Because even if it's a divorce, let's say they're going to stay in one home, the other parent leaves. And in many cases, people might see it as a win, like maybe that wasn't a safe environment, but that child would still be grieving the fact that I don't have a parent, or that my parent isn't what I hoped they would be or see on TV.
Right. And that's why sometimes they have to revisit it, because as they get older, they can have more understanding of why that had to happen, or a better understanding of what the loss was because their parent couldn't show up for them.
Right. So when you first see a child come in and you're told they're dealing with grief, if you even say the word grief, does a child know what that is? Or how do you start?
Yeah, so that's the thing, because they are like complete people, even though they have developmental milestones to reach in terms of cognitive changes, they're still a complete person. And so they're able to express, sometimes through play or through art, what is going on for them. Mm-hmm. But their art, one thing I would say I hope would be a takeaway for parents is like, when they are making art, to try to allow that to be an expression from them out. So one of the things I see a lot with kids who are grieving is they will paint in layers. And so they'll paint certain colors and then they'll cover the whole thing over with black. And that is
intentionally
intentionally. Absolutely.
Okay.
And so what happens is sometimes when kids are making art, we're so used to giving them praise. It's so automatic that we want to say, oh, that's such a beautiful butterfly, or, oh, that's such a pretty painting. But when they're making art, when they're using it as an emotional tool to express themselves, we want to try to just practice like radical acceptance, like, oh, you used a lot of red, or, oh, there's some green, or, oh, now the black goes on top. Like, of course, that's what happens. Because that is for them an expression. And if they start to shift it to what makes you happy, what gets praise from you, then it's less their own creation of what needs to come out.
And then when you're looking at the artwork, for example, and you're like, oh, that's a lot of red. But then you leave it there and not press like, what made you choose the red? I mean, just leave it.
Just leave it, because they'll tell you what they need to tell it. The fact that you've noticed it and you've opened the door if they want you to know more about it, it will come out.
You know, when you, since we connected and you were like, I don't know if this is something you're looking for. Like I told you, I was like, oh my gosh, yes, 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 yes. And since then I thought, I mean, children deal with a lot of grief. They're at the age where they're losing grandparents and life is changing and pets and children, we think they're, I shouldn't say we think, but it's just part of life. They go through it. Grandma was old, whatever, but their grief doesn't get acknowledged. And then we end up as adults, if you go on the path, where we're constantly hearing about your inner child.
Right.
We have to go back to the inner child who wasn't loved and supported.
Right. Finding out what that inner child needed at times where these wounds took place.
Right.
Because the wounds weren't addressed as wounds at that time. And we are resilient and we do have a tendency towards healing. So I think that's the other thing for parents maybe to take away is to not try to judge whatever their children are doing in play or art, but also to know that they are resilient. So if you sort of stock the environment and you make yourself available to just listen, it will naturally occur. So you don't have to have the perfect thing to say. You don't have to make it all better. You just need to be there honestly and compassionately.
Okay. And then you mentioned before we were recording that it can be a difficult task validating your child's perspectives without mixing in your own view of your ex.
Correct. That's one of the most difficult things, I think, is there's a tendency to, I've seen it both ways. I've seen it where parents will obviously negatively describe the other parent.
Right.
In a way that maybe is more their experience than the child's experience.
Mm-hmm.
But I've also seen people think it's their job they want to go so far away from doing that because maybe they've seen a really painful, ugly divorce and they're like, I'm not doing that to my kids.
Or they had it done to them as a child.
Right. Or had it done to them as a child and say, I'm not going to do that to my child.
Right.
But they go so far to the other way that they almost start to make excuses. And they start to say things like, oh, well, you know, that parent loves you. They're just busy.
Right.
Oh, it's okay because look, we're going to like, and they don't allow the child to have their experience of being disappointed or being angry.
And that's going to catch up. I mean,
Right.
The mask will come off.
Right. Right. So it's not your job to take the mask. Right. So it's not your job to take the mask off because again, that's where you go too far into like, see, he disappointed you again, or she disappointed you again. Right. So that's tricky because you can't.
Well, yeah, but I mean, if we try to paint it like dad's just busy at some point, that illusion, when it's up to that other parent to step in and be a parent, they're not going to be what you've created.
Correct. Right. And then you have, what your kids need from you most is to trust you that you are going to be completely as clear as you can with them. Not sugarcoating things, but not downplaying the other person as well.
Now, what about you're upset, man or woman, you're upset, you're crying, your child sees it, and they know daddy made mommy upset.
Yeah, it's tricky because that is your reality. And as much as you can work with your language, like I am upset, I am hurt. Trying to own the feelings and less likely to say this person made me this way.
Okay, so to say, like, to own it, I am upset, I am hurt, but that is a big difference than saying your dad hurt me.
Mm-hmm.
Or your dad made me cry, or daddy's not being nice to mommy.
Right. Not asking them to take your perspective and see it as the other person's at fault, but rather, I am upset, I am sad. This isn't what I wanted to have happen.
Yeah. And for people or parents listening, I just have to say, because I don't want to sound hypocritical, I am getting educated now. The education I wish I would have had. I made many of the mistakes we're talking about. and it's affected my children, it's affected my relationship with them. I mean, but I didn't have this education.
Yeah. And we're going to make mistakes. And that's, again, it's okay. Because, like, again, if you show up as authentically as you can, owning what you can, the fact that we make mistakes, we do have to fix relationships. That's the nature of relationships, right? Is we have to fix them. So
No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
just that so you don't have to be perfect. We all get things wrong at times, and we all get overwhelmed by emotions, and things get blurted out that we wish we could take back. That in itself is not going to be so damaging that your child won't get over it.
No.
It's more like once you realize, okay, I wish I hadn't said that. What do you do about it? That creates opportunities.
Okay. And that one thing I see often is, you have the court system involved. And the court writes things up, it's signed by a judge, it is going to be followed, but your child doesn't want to get in the car, your child doesn't want to go, they're angry, they're mad. Is that a sign? I mean, anger, the bottom line is grief, isn't it?
It is grief. It's also kind of conflicting roles, because we all feel towards our children a role of protector, and that we are sort of their holding space, and that we will be responsive to them. And when they say, here's what I would like to have happen, and we have to say, I hear you, but I can't provide that for you. You have to go this weekend. I no longer have the power because a court has now stepped in and said that we've got to follow this. Then your role has to shift to supporting them through that reality and acknowledging that I don't get to make all of the realities. Like I get to make bedtime. I get to pick when we can have a treat. There's a lot of things that as a parent, you get to shape their reality, but then sometimes you bump into, but that's true if they have a teacher they don't like, and the teacher says their homework has to be a certain way. You know what I'm saying? Like,
it's reality. It's reality. And you talk about making new rituals and routines which allow for grief and gratitude. I'm a huge believer in gratitude, but I'm thinking the rituals and routines, are there things you can put into place, even like child starting to get nervous because it's Thursday night, they know Friday morning they're getting picked up. As a parent, you can already see it setting in. What routines?
They can be really, really basic, simple routines. Like sometimes songs, like if you ever notice in like a pre-K or kindergarten, they'll start their day with a song, a welcome song or whatever, right? Mm-hmm. So you can create something that you do on a Thursday night that you begin it, and then you're like, okay, and we'll finish it Sunday night when you get home. So it creates a sense of continuity because they know that they've started something with you and they're going to finish it when they get back. Yeah. It could be a game. They don't have to be huge. I mean, a ritual is anything that you do repeatedly where people bond with each other and it has a significance for those people. It marks something important for those people.
And that's, I was thinking too, like the other thing with like children and grief, kids can be mean. Like, I mean, humans can be mean, but your child could get bullied at school. They could have a best friend one day and the next day they're not their friend. It's a lot of grief they go through, but say a loss of a pet. I mean, and we talk about rituals. Do you like the tangible rituals that you can be done?
Yeah, I think again, anything that you repeat, and again, the more senses you bring in, the better. So for rituals, sometimes there's, like when you think of going to church, there's like the incense, there's the certain songs that are repeated, so any of your senses, so sight, smell, sound, touch, the more senses you put into a ritual, the better, the more meaning it can convey.
Okay. And what about you have a parent that has more than one child? And just like adults, they're handling their grief differently.
Absolutely. And that's one of the ways that I work with families when they're grieving, to try to have like a really basic ritual. Like, so at Kathy's place, we used to do something where people would come in and they would say their name and say who they're thinking about that night, because sometimes people do have multiple losses. So it's
Mhm.
like who they want to think about. And there was one child who, it was just overwhelming to come in and say that he lost his mom, and he was only like 4. So he would come in and say his name and say, I like cars, or I like, right? Like he just could not get out. I miss my mom. I'm thinking of my
Oh.
mom. So it was okay, because he would sit in a circle, he would say his name, he would still participate, but he didn't have to, there was room for him to participate in a way that felt good for him. So if you are creating a ritual around a loss, you can make it open-ended enough that people can participate. So if everybody shares a memory, well, one person could say, I don't want to share a memory, but you could still sit at the table and listen to the other people's memories, so that someday when they're ready to, they can add and fully participate in the ritual.
Okay. And now what about the siblings are feeling grief, and that can lead to anger, because it's the underlining, I mean, grief can lead to anger anyway, but they're taking it out on each other. Now you
Right.
have the mom who's like, she's in her own grief. The kids are fighting. She's already on the tipping point.
She wants quiet.
She wants quiet, but
something
she
to not
blows
go
up,
wrong.
or this mom has blown up a few times, just because you're just like, I can't. And you two screaming at each other, and me saying hands to yourself for number 15 times. You lose it.
You lose it. You lose it. And you realize we're all overwhelmed and we all need something. And so that's when, whether it's a peace circle or like anything you can create ahead of time, so that when you hit that overwhelm, you're like, all right, we are all sitting down and listening to our favorite song. Anything that reminds you of like, okay, we're on the same team.
Yeah.
You know, can help ground you. Any of those kind of grounding things, but insisting that people join you in a grounding technique, especially with teenagers, you're not going to get full cooperation. You're
No,
not
I
going to
was
get
gonna say,
full participation. But if
no.
they can at least respect that there's a need for it and that other people are doing it, and to not disrupt it, that might be enough at that point in time.
Okay. Yeah. And even if you even if you have a little quiet moment, that's okay, right? Like, after, it doesn't have to be fixed right away.
Right, right. You're not going to fix it, right? At that grounding technique, that moment is just, let's bring everybody's emotions down.
Okay.
So now what do we need? Because sometimes the kids, they have to come into contact and it's a little messy. And as parents, we're almost trying to buffer it so much that we don't give them that opportunity to come into contact. But oftentimes, like in a divorce, sometimes they do get pulled where one will side more with one parent than the other parent, and then they're trying to figure out, as siblings, how do they stay bonded even though they're being pulled in a different direction.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't want to just squelch that, because that's some important interpersonal work that they have to do, so
Yeah. Now,
if
what
I'm
about, today's January 20th. I'm not sure when this will actually, people will hear it, but it's January 20th. We just came out of the holidays. And
sure.
I saw and read so many, the holidays can be very hard for someone newly divorced. It's very hard on the children to not have both parents. So what about those big days that have been family shared, big birthdays, holidays? It's been a big tradition that shattered.
Yeah, I think what you do is you kind of take apart the different activities, and rather than thinking of them all as one big, it's all the 8 nights of Hanukkah, or it's all the Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, gift exchange, and spiritual services, right? And you kind of say, okay, well, we can have our gift exchange on a different day and it still counts.
Mm-hmm.
Or we can go to a religious service on a different day and it still counts.
Right.
Or we can use Zoom and do a celebration in the evening, even if we're not in the same home. Like, so you do find a way, and And sometimes we think this is what's so important about the holidays. It's the Christmas morning opening gifts. And yet, if you talk to kids, they might say, well, I really like when we bake cookies with grandma, and I like when I get stuff, but they don't really care that it's on December 25th, right? Like, if they got stuff on December 23rd, they'd be just as happy. So you can figure out together, like, okay, what do you most want to have happen, or a birthday? Kids don't often want the elaborate parties that parents feel they have to throw for them. You know, and so it's more really listening, like what, but if they do want their parents to be together, as hard as it is, limit the time to, okay, we're going to have opening gifts and cutting cake together on your birthday, but then you're going to have a party with your friends on a different day. Or, you know, try to, if they want to see, and another time that can be hard is like graduations.
Yeah.
You know, I've certainly worked with people where it's like they want both parents there at their graduation, but they can't sit together. And that's really hard on a child.
Yeah. And I think if we can, and you keep it to a, and I say this as a divorce coach, you keep it to a public place, you know, so your place still feels, that's still your safe area. But if you can go to a public place, that's huge. And just keep it surface. You don't have to get into deep, just nod and smile and know you're doing it for your child, that love to be able to take you through any experience. But you don't have to let your own boundaries, guards, and everything down.
Nope. You can set it up. Look, it's going to be 20 minutes. We're going to, you know, meet at Starbucks. We're going to cut the cake.
Yep.
We're going to take some pictures, open some presents, and then we're going to be done.
Do you find, because now I'm thinking the reverse of, you know, we're talking about when people want to make it better and fix it, but what about when people, maybe the child is okay, but people are going, you must be really sad. Oh, I'm sure. How are you doing? Can we, I don't want to say awaken grief, but ignite or, you know, plant the seed of grief? Can the child all of a sudden be like, well, now I should feel sad, so I will feel sad?
No, I think you can put expectations onto children and they'll try to meet those expectations. But you really won't touch what they need to process inside. So if they're feeling a combination of relief and ease, because now their life is more predictable, because that's what kids really need, is predictable. They need to know what's going to happen, right? So if their life has become more predictable and there's more ease in their day-to-day life, and what they're feeling is better, and someone were to say, oh, it must be so terrible, you know, your dad or mom moved out, but that's not what they feel, you might create this expectation in them of like, oh, am I supposed to feel that? But they know what they feel.
Okay. And now a parent walks in to your office and they say, my child doesn't really seem the same, but I'm not sure, what should I look for to know they need grief counseling or they would benefit?
Yeah, I would say you're looking for any like extreme changes where they're fine and then all of a sudden they're not fine, right? Sometimes with grief, they call it, with little kids, they call it puddle jumping, because their emotions can change so fast. They can be fine and then all of a sudden they can't have the type of cereal they want and they're like throwing themselves on the ground, right? So where the emotion doesn't seem to fit the whatever they're, you know, upset
like the reaction isn't matching the action that took place.
Right. That would be one sign. Difficulty sleeping, not paying attention at school, and any kind of regression. So like in little kids, they, you know, they're potty trained and then they're not. But those kinds of regressions can happen for all kinds of reasons. So I would, again, don't jump to worry.
Right.
You're just noticing a child that was able to complete their homework and turn it in without any direction, all of a sudden now is losing papers and can't. Like any time where you see them seem like they're younger, like they already got through that developmental milestone, but now they're back struggling with it again.
Okay. And then the grief of, say, a loved one, not divorce, but truly the loss of a grandparent or a young person, that unexpected feeling we all, like, we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. And now they're scared to let anybody they love leave the house, or, now they're just in this place of fear because they've suffered this loss.
Right. And it's tricky because you're going through it too, right? Like these are
Right.
happening in parallel and then they impact each other, because there is definitely that sort of existential crisis after a loss, because we have this bubble, like everything is going to go along fine. And then all of a sudden, wait a minute, things didn't go along fine. So what else could go wrong, right? So there's this journey that everybody has to go on to, you can call it making meaning, existential crisis. And this has come back to where it's like you can support and love each other through it, but you can't do it for them, right? So if a child is worrying and has anxiety about what else could go wrong,
Right.
you can't give them false promises of like, oh, nothing else will ever go wrong.
Exactly. Like, because they're relying on you in that promise.
Right. And you can't control it, because then
No.
something else goes wrong and they're gonna think, but you said nothing else would go wrong. And so it's more a matter of, I'm here, I'm with you, and we'll get through it together.
I'm here, I'm with you, we'll get through it together. That was pretty much answered. I was just going to say, what happens when you don't have the words? I talked about my younger daughter, the loss of just a goldfish. But when my oldest daughter, she was 3, and we lost our golden retriever because he was old. He was just old and he naturally died, and I was heartbroken and I'm crying and she's crying, I think, because I was crying. She was 3. But she's always been my little thinker, and she goes, well, where does he go? And I said, well, because my belief system, I said, I believe he's in heaven now. And she goes, well, how does he get there? She's looking at an 80-pound dog going, she's 3. And I went, I was crying. I went, I think he floats. But her face, she looked at me like,
how do you float to heaven?
What? And it made me start laughing in the moment, because she looked at me and looked at him and like,
he's not lifting up.
This big dog's gonna levitate up into the sky, but so I love you kind of answered, when you don't have the words, what can you say? So you don't make promises you can't keep.
Right. And that kids, especially like 3-year-olds, are concrete thinkers. So they're looking for concrete answers. So when we did Kathy's place, we used to do something called Alive and Dead, which we would bring in a dead plant and a live plant, so that the younger kids could actually touch it and feel it and understand the difference. Because just even that concept of what is alive or dead for a younger child, it's going to be like, what does that mean? They're dead.
I've never thought of that. Because it's true, the words we take for granted, the things we know, for them, okay, the plan's dead, but tomorrow it'll be good, right? Like,
right.
The concept of like, no, it's
right. And sometimes people will get upset, again, speaking about death, but like, oh, they went to heaven. Okay, well, I want to go, which doesn't mean that they're suicidal. It just means that
it means like, well, I want to go where grandma is, or
right. Which bus do I take to get there? Right. Like,
yeah, this isn't the floating dog. This is a different one.
I have a golden retriever too.
Okay. But yeah, so for parents that are in a state of strong grief themselves, they are in betrayal, they are in grief, and they have to sincerely take the advice you've given. Because kids know when we're faking it.
Yeah, they know.
Like, you can't just say the words, but your tone and your actions and even your body tenseness is different. They're not going to believe you if you're like, no, Daddy's really a nice guy. I mean, how do you like get over your own? How do we just set it aside for a moment? What do you advise the parents when they're coming in so they can focus on the child that you're working with.
Right. So let's think of a situation where that might happen, because I think it helps to have context, where a parent is really upset because the other parent has not shown up, or says they're not going to do visitation like they said they would, or has called and berated them and called them names, something where they're like feeling a strong emotion about what has just occurred. And their child wants to understand that. Mommy, what's wrong? Right? That's when
Yeah, please go ahead.
that's when you really have to take your deep breath and get grounded yourself. Like they say, put your oxygen mask on first.
Right.
Right? The first step one is, what do you need to do to be okay in that moment?
Mm-hmm.
You know, like you've just had to really firmly, and they've heard you raise your voice, establish a boundary, like, don't speak to me that way, or whatever you've had to do, right? And now your child's been watching this, because they pick it all up. You can't completely keep them separate from it. It's going to happen, right? So the first thing you do is let them know, I can tell you in a minute. Let me get okay. Are you okay? Let's breathe together.
I can tell you in a minute. Just buy yourself some time, reassure them. I can tell you
And and try to let your touch just hold their hand gently, something soothing to soothe yourself and soothe them.
Now, you just hit on, I'm so glad you said this, because I know it's a big one and I missed it. Yes, the not getting picked up. The child thinks the other parent's coming at a certain time. They're ready, they're packed, or whatever they have. The door's open, they're watching, and the car doesn't pull up. That is a double whammy, because now the child's upset, and you as a parent, you're mad.
You're mad that your child got hurt. You're like, how dare you do this to the baby? Like, you don't know. Like, do what you want.
I get to clean it up. Like,
right,
that's a normal, a lot of reaction. Thank you. I get to clean this up.
Right. You hurt them, and then I have to make it okay. But here's the thing, you can't make it okay because the other person hurt them. Right. So, but it's tricky, because if you come in really strong, thinking that you're validating that child, like, blah, 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 could you believe that, blah, 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 left you here again. They may need to defend that person, because again, they've internalized that part of that person, and now they're right. So you got to just be as gentle as possible to find out where they're at.
Yeah. Without doing what you mentioned earlier, like, you know what? Dad would be here if he could. He got stuck. He had the flat tire, and make up some big lie.
Right. You can't cover for that person and try to minimize the hurt that they've caused, but you can't voice and amplify the hurt, because your job is just to be a mirror to your child if they should choose to tell you about it.
Okay.
Because they might choose to talk to a sibling about it. They might choose to talk to a grandparent or a teacher or a friend at school, but telling you how hurt they are by the other parent, even that might create in them, tap on a disloyalty, because maybe the other parent has fed seeds like that. But you know what I'm saying? Like, you just want to go in really gently to, it's this way. I don't think they're coming.
Yes. Go ahead, please. They're not
I
coming.
don't think they're coming. Why don't we put your stuff back? What would you like to do?
And back to that, I'm here for you.
We'll get through this. I'm
Yeah.
not going anywhere.
And for someone who's in that moment where we're not thinking rationally, this is no place to judge yourself. In that moment, you had plans for that evening or weekend.
Right?
So now you're standing there going, my child just got his little heart ripped out. I get to clean it up, and I have to cancel
what I was
one time I was going to do something and stay calm and not blow up, because that's going to get taken back to the courts. But in that moment, what could be one thing that you could tell a parent that you're like, your child needs
you to soothe yourself so you can soothe them?
Oh, you're good. Soothe yourself so you can soothe them yourself.
Right. Because if you haven't soothed yourself, you're more likely to jump into either trying to fix it or minimize it, or amplifying it, which they may not need you to do at all. They don't need you to do that. They're feeling it. They don't need you to amplify it.
No. And then I'm thinking of like with the different children I've known, or my two daughters, each daughter, both my daughters, respond differently. There's different ways of love, like the 5 love languages.
Right.
So do you think that's important to narrow down what love language is most effective with your child?
You could put it in that language of love language, but I think I think a broader umbrella would be like soothing yourself so you can soothe them and really listen with compassion to what they need, because they will tell you if you're listening and you're like, okay, so I don't think they're coming. Looks like we're gonna, be together tonight. What do you think we should do? Like, what would you like to do? And they're like, I just want to go to my room, because they're just mad and they don't want to connect with you right now. Okay, but I'm going to check on you in a little bit.
Right.
But
for actions to help them, like you might have one child that really needs a hug. They need that hug. Another child maybe doesn't want to be hugged, but a note on their pillowcase would be effective. Like knowing how that expression, that the way that's effective.
Right. What's effective for them? Because again, you're trying to, like, you're doing what you need to soothe yourself. So then when you go to soothe them, it needs to be what they need to feel reassured, cared for, loved, not what you necessarily want to do. Right.
Or what you would need in that moment. Like you might think, I would need a hug, so they would need a hug.
Right.
And I know I have one daughter that is not what she wants in a moment of hurt or anger.
Right. They want to go inside, deal with it, and then come back to you when they're ready.
Right. And then you can listen, but be respectful to their needs. Not thinking what you should do, but knowing what they need.
Right. That there's no right answer for what you should do, as much as just soothe yourself, listen to them, and try to provide what they need.
Yeah.
Give them the chance to let you know that.
Now, as a psychologist that specializes in children, I have never asked this question, but I think it's huge. They hear way more than we think.
Absolutely. There really aren't secrets. Don't think you have secrets. They may not understand what they've overheard, but they have caught it and they'll mull it over. And then as they get older, they'll unpack it.
Because it's true. Or you might think they're in the other room, they're watching TV, they're playing with Legos, their little antennas are like hyper aware.
Yeah, they do know. There really aren't secrets. Even if they don't know all the details, they can pick up the feeling tones. They're picking up the processing of how the conversations flow, the emotional tones, the pitch of voice. Like they're taking in lots of information. So they are really aware of your experience.
And then what about, let's say, extending the family nucleus to, a lot of times grandparents are very involved, and they can, clash with what you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, they can.
Or enhance it. But I mean, how do you get that how do you expand what you're trying to do for your child when you're working with them to like go out into maybe their school, their grandparents? Do you tell parents, talk to their teachers, talk to the grandparents?
Absolutely. And one of the moms at Kathy's place shared this with me. She came for a few years and then we happened to catch up, and she shared with me that she wished she had felt more comfortable being more direct with the school about, hey, what you think ought to happen doesn't fit for us. Mm-hmm. This was actually the aunt of the little boy who couldn't participate at 4 and say his name. Yeah. So his aunt raised him and she became his mom, and he called her mom. And she felt like she spent a lot of time trying to force him to get the homework done the way they wanted, and it's like, no, you have a different reality. So what they think ought to happen doesn't necessarily apply to you.
Right. That's,
And
yeah, for people that are taking in children of grief that have lost a parent, where you really, besides the response, I mean, you're their advocate. You have to speak
up for them.
They're not the same as a little kid next to them in the classroom, and they're not going to participate the same.
Right. They're going to need different things. So even as a child that's going through a divorce, they're going to need different things, maybe different than what they needed in the past, but then also different than maybe what their peers need. And so they do need you to be their advocate. But like we were saying before, you're with them as they navigate these things, because there are limits to what you can do. You can't always make a grandparent not give them sugar or not put them to bed at a certain time, right? Like you can't, their grandparent's going to kind of do with it. You can't always get a grandparent not to trash talk the other parent, even though you've said don't. They're going to hear things from their grandparents that you maybe don't want them to hear. And so you have to kind of just know that you're not going to be able to keep them in that bubble. And it's okay, because they don't need to be in a bubble. They just need you in their corner. They just need you calmly listening to them and solving things with them.
Because they're going to have to they're going to have to handle the grief and skills to gain the skills. And do you think it's, like many things, easier when we're younger if we can adapt those skills early on in life to process grief?
I mean, I do think that it does teach you things that stay with you the rest of your life. One of the things, Kathy's Place is named after my sister, Kathy, and she died when I was 10 and she was 12. And I'm sure that journey impacted.
Wait, what was it? Tell me
So
again.
Kathy is, for Kathy's Place, is my sister. And she died when I was 10 and she was 12.
Oh.
And so I know that that's a part of how come I became a psychologist, how come I understand that kids need to be listened to. So we really do, you've probably heard this, it's a cliche, but our wounds become our gifts.
If we choose to.
If we choose to, it's as to what we do. So again, your children have the pain they're going through a divorce. It's real and you want to support them through it, but it doesn't have to limit their ability to thrive and have really meaningful lives and really good relationships.
Yeah, I guess my last thought, and I could talk to you all day, but I want to get to any last parting words you have and let everyone know where to find you, your services, Kathy's Place. But what's my thought? If we don't let them process a grief, can it then just turn into anger that just sticks through the teens, sticks through the 20s, and really do destructive?
Yeah, it really can be, if it's unresolved, if they're not given a chance to process their emotions and understand themselves and work through it. It can. I know I did my residency in a juvenile justice program, and I know there was research saying that a lot of, like, I think it's like a high percent, like 70% of the kids that are in juvenile justice programs have an unresolved grief. Right. So it doesn't go away. You just put it on layaway, but you get another thing. Families can kind of disconnect. I remember a woman that I worked with when she was a child, her mother died, and the family decided her father wasn't up to handling the kids. So they sent them to different homes to be raised by different aunts and uncles. And then there were no pictures of their mom. So yes, it can hurt people if you don't give them a chance as children to process.
Okay, I lied. I have one more question. But just there's situations that maybe one child goes with one parent, one child goes with the other, and now they are feeling, even though they might not know it, there's a loss of their sibling. Right.
So, I mean, when I do work with families that are going through this process, I try to work with them to keep the sibling group together.
Okay.
So that they all go together on a Thursday night. Because a lot of times when you hear people will give you the story of their life, the divorce wasn't necessarily the hardest part. But when one child could drive and stopped going to the other parent's house, so then that younger child went by themselves into an environment without their support of their other sibling, that can become even more harder than the divorce.
Okay.
You know?
Well, tell us, because you have Kathy's Place, plus you have Shattered to Connected. You have multiple ways people can reach you. And if you have any last thing that you wanted to share.
Just that, I'm on Facebook. People can find me there. I'm also on Instagram. People can direct message me there. And Shattered to Connected, what I'm trying to create now is it is a coaching program. So it is meant to be a hybrid where there's like online resources and then direct coaching with me. And I'm also in the process of creating an app.
Tell us about that.
So the app should be up, like the first run through it should be up here in February.
Okay.
So people.
What is your app going to be called?
It's going to be called Shattered to Connected.
Okay. And that's going to be on the grief, because co-parenting apps are becoming so big. The family wizard, all that. So to have an app.
So this would be grief. It's going to be kind of tailored towards parents who have lost a spouse.
Okay.
But it would also be for other caregivers, because a lot of times it is an aunt or an uncle or a grandparent who lost an adult child or lost an adult sibling, but now they're raising nieces and nephews or grandchildren.
Right, right.
So it's the idea of parenting, but there's been a significant loss to those children.
Right. I mean, yeah, your app is totally about grief in children. I guess I said that out loud, thinking for parents in divorce to add to their app toolbox, that this would be a great app for them to research and find.
Sure. They could definitely, because there are resources that would overlap.
Yeah. And this show, I shouldn't say that, because this show, I wanted to just be on children's grief, whatever the cause or way. So if you are hearing this and you did lose a spouse or your child did lose something, this app would be for you. Right.
Even if your family is intact, but you lost a grandparent.
Yes. This is about children's grief. That's the message. That's your message. Right.
But we know that divorce is one of the ways that children will experience grief and loss, and it's a significant loss.
Yep. And I assume that we will have all that information in the show notes, but you work over Zoom. So even though you're in Florida, anyone could work with you.
Yeah, that's kind of why I went into the realm of the coaching and the app, is to make it more accessible. And the group coaching that I do is over the internet, over either Zoom or Google Meets. And then in the app, there will be ways for people to have sort of direct coaching, because there'll be direct messaging and also like live question and answer.
Well, if they start following you now, Facebook, Instagram, all that, I'm sure you will roll out the information on the app as the app is coming out.
Exactly. There will definitely be a launch where they'll see that when they can join and then have more information about it.
Yeah. Well, this is a beautiful job you're doing, and it takes a very special person to deal with, the grief of children, because I'm sure God has its moments.
Yeah, it's very, it's somewhat uplifting though too, because children are so resilient.
Yeah.
And hearts do heal. Mm-hmm. And so when you see someone go on a journey and they heal and they really build a life that they really love, that's so rewarding.
Now, I don't know if we know what you can go into teens. What's the youngest you would say to start working with a child?
When I was, so at Kathy's Place or in my practice, I would work with kids as young as 2.5, 3.
2.5, 3. That's what I thought. I'm like, one's probably too young, but that 2.5 or 3, you can really start to.
Yeah. Because even the ones that only have a few words, they can still in play tell you the story of what they need to tell you through play.
And that's a critical age. Like you said, if you see them start to regress, like in those big moments, that they should be like potty training and not just a little setback, like, but when you
Right.
see
Right.
big step
When-
backs.
Yeah. Yeah. When you start getting things, and if like, so kids are supposed to, again, puddle jump. So they're supposed to have a breakdown and it's unexpected, but then they're also supposed to be like, okay, I shook that off. I'm ready to go ride my bike. Right. Like they jump out of it quickly also. They can turn it on and off quickly.
I think that they should create puddle jumping for menopause. Can you work on that program? I am allowed to puddle jump. I am in menopause.
I think that's true.
Oh, well, thank you, Jean. This has been, I want to just share this with everyone I know, because we all have a child that has gone through grief, or we have a niece or nephew. No one's immune to grief.
Yeah.
And it's a special skill set.
Well, thank you for having me again. I appreciate the opportunity to get the information out there. More children can, have what they need.
Well, yeah, and have support done correctly, because that's
Right. Because the resilience is there and they will heal as long as the environment encourages it.
well, thank you. I really appreciate this.
I'm so glad to be here.